I do apologize in advance. I haven't had a huge amount of time in terms of preparation, so but I'll probably get through it in about 20 minutes or so. So yeah, as Lauren rightly mentioned, I'm Ed Relf. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a really astonishing business, which is Laundrapp. But today, I think it's really, really important. Yes, I can tell you a little bit about the Laundrapp story, but really, I want you to try and take something away from this talk. And what I'm going to present to you is essentially what I call my no metrics, no marketing approach to startups. So this is me, and I didn't bring my sledgehammer today, so I apologize. But people do tend to find me smashing up a lot of washing machines these days, because obviously the business that I'm involved with is trying to disrupt this kind of 5-decade-old laundry and dry cleaning industry. I've been very, very fortunate to work for some great businesses. As Lauren rightly mentioned, Mind Candy, and obviously building the Moshi Monsters global brand. And I was the CMO and CCO at that business, and now obviously co-founder and CEO at Laundrapp. And I've been involved in the world of digital marketing now for about 18 years or so, so I know a lot about kind of how to acquire users, profitability, ROI, all of the key metrics you need to track, different platforms, et cetera, and I'm here for the rest of the day. So obviously, unfortunately, I can't answer questions here, but if you want to find me afterwards, I'm more than happy to give you my business card and help you if you have any questions about marketing. I've been fortunate to win some awards, but let me give you a very quick overview in terms of Laundrapp, just to give you some background before I get into kind of the marketing fundamentals of the presentation. So essentially what we did about 10 months ago now was we set out to basically turn the smartphone into a remote control for people's laundry. It sounds kind of crazy, actually almost quite audacious, but it's really quite a magical business. And what we've now got today is essentially a service that allows you to outsource all of your laundry and all of your dry cleaning directly through your smartphone. So we control a fleet here in London of vehicles that we operate from 7 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. These vehicles are controlled by all of the technology, which I'll show you in a second, and we're actually operational now across a number of towns and cities across the UK. So as I said, from 7 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night, and our price is from just £2 per item, so, and the app, as you can see here. So in terms of the actual technology itself, obviously you can download the app, the consumer app here, which is on the right-hand side. But really, the really interesting part of our business is this piece in the middle that we call Laundrapp Pulse. And this is actually the thing that does all of our real-time fleet and logistics algorithms and tracking all of our fleet across the country actually in real time. So we've spent a lot of time working on that side of the business. And then we have Laundrapp Drive, and actually Laundrapp Drive is essentially kind of like Uber, actually. But unfortunately, you won't ever get to see it unless you're a Laundrapp driver, because this is the technology that they actually use to track the orders as they come through dynamically from our customers around the country. So that's a little bit about the technology. We're platform agnostic, so we launched initially on iOS, but very quickly went to Android as well. We support tablet, obviously mobile I've mentioned, and web now as well. And we're looking at other platforms and potentially looking to bring to TV and the smartwatch also very soon as well. But really, this is the really interesting thing for me with setting up a business like Laundrapp, is that what we're doing here is we're really trying to change consumer behavior. And changing consumer behavior is a lot harder than I realized, to be honest. I've come from the video games industry, actually. I worked in video games now for, well, I worked in video games for about 10, maybe 12 years. So I worked for other video game companies like Codemasters and Microprose back in the day, working on games like Civilization and XCOM and Roller Coaster Tycoon and Street Fighter and Resident Evil and games like this. And I can tell you it's a hell of a lot easier than launching essentially what is now a logistics business. It's a very, very complicated business. But essentially what we're trying to do here is trying to change consumer habit and behavior. And it's kind of obvious to say, I mean, we're in that on-demand space, and you'll be very, very aware of that already, but we're really trying to pioneer this convergence of digital meets physical, real-world goods and services. It's a really, really interesting space. And clearly disrupting a billion-dollar industry. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, laundry and dry cleaning. It's not particularly sexy or glamorous. And the story is essentially I was walking through my high street in Finchley in North London, And there was a realization for me as I was walking down the street and realized actually, I walked past the betting shop and then the bank, even the travel agency, and realized that every single one of those businesses has been completely disrupted by digital. And then I got to the Laundrapp, or the dry cleaner on the corner, and just realized this was actually an entire industry, a multi-billion pound industry that hasn't yet been touched by digital. So that's where the idea from Laundrapp really came from. And obviously there's lots of interesting companies in this whole on-demand space, and we're very fortunate to be kind of considered, one of the leaders, or certainly one of the fastest growing in the space. And we often get recognized as being Uber for laundry, which I think is very flattering for a number of reasons. So 25 locations across the country now, actually closer to 30. So we're here in London, Bristol, Birmingham, Edinburgh, Milton Keynes, et cetera, et cetera. So growing very, very quickly. Roughly one city per week is our rate of growth for the company. We're cleaning an item or a garment every 10 seconds. So that's the kind of velocity that the business is now growing at. We've seen double-digit growth now for the last 10 months consecutively. And one of the UK, not only one of London's fastest growing startups, but one of the UK's fastest growing startups as well. And all achieved in 38 weeks. So it's quite a remarkable story. I actually had hair 38 weeks ago, and it's, as you can see, I gave up on it. But yeah, it's quite a story. But we're still a startup, and we understand that really a success in a startup is being around tomorrow, just lots of days in a row. And I'm still here today, and hopefully we'll still be here tomorrow. So we must be doing something right. But you know what? Just like every startup, we make a ton of mistakes as well, but we learn from those mistakes and we iterate very, very quickly, which is one of the principles I'm going to talk to you about in terms of a no metrics, no marketing approach to building your companies. So that's enough about Laundrapp. As I said, I really want you guys to walk away with something from this. And as I was putting the presentation together last week, it's actually quite difficult because there's quite a broad range of people here and quite a cross-section. So I apologize in advance that some of this you may think, yeah, okay, we already do this in our company, but there might be one or two things that you can pull out from it, and hopefully it's interesting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 10 ways to build a lean, no metrics, no marketing approach to your startup. So this is one of my favorite quotes. Sometimes you just have to jump and build the parachute on the way down. And actually, it's one of the guiding principles for me when it comes to building a marketing strategy or marketing plan, particularly for a brand new startup, particularly in a brand new industry sector like the one we're in now. And you know what? A good decision made quickly is way better than a great one made slowly. And that's really, really important because what works today in terms of your digital marketing strategy may not work tomorrow. So it's very, very important to take a really lean and rapid iterative approach to your advertising and your marketing for your business. And in this digital day and age, when it comes to marketing, things are constantly changing and constantly moving. As I said, things that worked yesterday won't work today. And it's a very, very complex and very complicated space to be in. And what I'm going to hopefully do now is try to unpick a little bit of this and try to give you a framework for what we do at Laundrapp and what I've done at previous companies. So the very, very first thing is read this book, and I'm sure most of you already have. There are two books that genuinely have changed my life and my career. The Lean Startup is one of them. 4-Hour Work Week is the other. If you don't take anything else away from this presentation, go buy this book and read it. It's incredible. I've read it 3 or 4 times. And actually a lot of what I'll talk about now has actually been borrowed from this in terms of the lean strategy and principles. And be prepared to fail, because you know what, when you're doing your marketing for your company or your new startup, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and it's really, really important that you learn from those mistakes, because you know what, 90% of what you do just won't work. And even today with Laundrapp, we will continuously try new ways of trying to reach our customers across the country, knowing that the majority of what we try just won't work. But the trick is obviously understanding the 10% that does work, because the 10% that does work is the bit that you can ultimately scale your company on. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the tracking and how we find that 10% of what it is that works. So fail, but obviously fail as quickly as possible. So really understanding your financial model might sound a little bit odd from a marketing standpoint, but actually the answers to what you're looking for when you're building your early stage startup tend to actually be in the business model, because what you're looking to do at such an early stage in growing your company is essentially you're trying to extrapolate out all of those key metrics that will become fundamental to how you build not only your marketing strategy, but ultimately the commercial success of your company. So for us, these are just examples, right? Obviously, you have a marketing budget, which obviously leads into a cost per install, which obviously leads into retention, which is an engagement metric, which is usually tracked on a day 1, day 7, and day 30 basis. Conversions to monetization, CAC, which is cost per acquisition, average transaction value, ARPDAU, LTV. I mean, these are pretty basic metrics, but these are really, really fundamental to actually the success in your marketing programs. And then you obviously want to build essentially a lean marketing dashboard. Now, the dashboard I'll show you is incredibly simple, but as I progress through the presentation, I'll start to build the dashboard out and show you essentially what we do at Laundrapp. So this is an example of a dashboard, and that almost a carbon copy of actually what we do in our company, right? Just a little bit bigger. And essentially what you have here is a funnel through the product or the service, right? So you start from a budget, so an advertising budget, that leads into a cost per install, which leads into your engagement metrics, into your conversion, cost per acquisition, average transaction value, LTV, and essentially you then calculate your return on investment. And I just want to introduce another concept, which is sell, convert, keep. And I talk a lot actually within my businesses around sell, convert, keep. Essentially what it means is user acquisition, conversion, and retention. And what we do is we completely overlay that on top of the dashboard, right? And the reason for that is because different channels will impact different parts of the funnel. Now, there are some channels that actually have the potential to impact every part of the funnel, but that's quite rare. So, for example, SMS is a potential channel that has impact all the way through the funnel, as does push messaging. But email marketing is another good example of a potential channel that touches every part of the funnel. But if you consider TV advertising or paid search marketing through Google, or you consider Facebook advertising, etc., tends to be focused much more about user acquisition. But then ultimately, you can obviously retarget and bring customers back in, which is much more about retention. But very, very roughly, when we're approaching marketing channels, we consider, is it sell, is it convert, or is it keep? And we try to optimize our strategy around that. The next thing that I'd highly, highly recommend you do, I've done it pretty much all of my last businesses for the last decade, is introduce this concept of a service review. Now, it's incredibly important in these days, in these digital days, that the marketing and the development team work hand in hand. And it was very, very early stage in my career that those two teams tended to be quite far apart from one another. There was a lack of understanding, etc. And in this day and age, it's integral that those two teams are brought together. Now, what tends to happen in most digitally led startups is you now tend to have a product manager that tends to be kind of the glue in the middle of those two organizations. Now, we don't have a product manager. I'm ultimately the product manager, but I'm also the marketing manager. But it's really, really important that those two teams work together. And the service review is actually a process for doing that. So essentially, once a week, everybody in the business comes together and you go through the dashboard. And that dashboard, which I'll go through in a second in a little bit more detail, will ultimately allow you to make some really key data-driven decision-making around the business, which hopefully will come a little bit clearer shortly. And then it's kind of obvious stuff, right? Just consider the tracking from the start, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the tracking now. You know, I've consulted with a lot of businesses where, you know, people just won't think about the tracking. Or, I mean, in fairness, I think most people tend to not be happy with their level of tracking. But actually, when you pick through what it is that people have problems with, I tend to find there's a common theme. And that common theme is it tends to be that people are tracking just way too much, and things that are actually kind of irrelevant, actually. And there are even times in Laundrapp, for example, where we may have been tracking 10, 20, 30 different metrics, most of which actually don't really matter at all. So getting the tracking right from the start is really, really important in terms of building out your marketing dashboard. And essentially it falls into three areas, right? You've got analytics, which is kind of obvious, whether it's GA or localytics or whatever. That basically tells you how people are using your service. That's kind of obvious stuff. But then there's this bit in the middle, right, which is attribution. And most people get this completely wrong. And attribution is really, really important, because if you choose the right attribution tool, it basically allows you to integrate all of your marketing SDKs without any additional work. Now, what I tend to find with most businesses, and certainly a lot of early stage businesses, is they tend to have the analytics. It tends to be GA or something similar. They tend to have no attribution, which basically means now they're stuck in terms of tracking their key marketing metrics, which I'll come on to in a while. And they tend to maybe have a couple of marketing SDKs put into their app, whether it's Facebook or something similar. The attribution piece for me is definitely the most important of these three. I actually rarely look at analytics, if I'm being honest. We focus pretty much purely on the attribution side of things. But there's a problem, right? And this is the issue. There are just so many tools, and it's kind of bewildering, actually, how many there are out there. And I could talk to you for hours and hours just about some of these, but the reality is I've probably only used maybe 2 or 3% of what you can see on the screen. So it's really, really confusing. But genuinely, if you want to ask me questions about analytics and attribution, etc., please get a business card off me afterwards. I'll be more than happy to help you out if I can. But I'll try to unpick some of this stuff with you now. Absolutely avoid vanity metrics. You know, often people will tell me, oh, we've got this number of likes, this many shares, or, you know, people have viewed this many times. It's kind of partly irrelevant. They're essentially all wrapped up as engagement metrics. So, okay, there is an element of relevance, but really from a marketing standpoint, you really want to focus on that funnel, on that dashboard that I showed you a while ago, and avoid this analysis paralysis, right? I've been in this situation many, many times before. You'll sit down with a bunch of people and they'll have huge presentations going through all of these different metrics, and it just stops you from making decisions. So again, the marketing dashboard, which I'll come back onto shortly, just really allows you just to carve all of that noise away and just make some really clean and clinical decision making within the business. And then this concept of soft launching, right, which most people do these days. I'm really, really happy to say, but you know, I still often come across companies that haven't yet really considered soft launching. So a really good example would be, I won't name them for obvious reasons, but you know, I'd met a company 6 months or so ago, and they told me, you know, fantastic, they developed this app. This app had been downloaded maybe 5, maybe 10 million times. It's huge, and that's brilliant. But what they had realized was that actually the conversions just aren't there. It's not monetizing. It's too late. You know, you should have realized that when you had 1,000 downloads, not 10 million downloads, because actually those 10 million people are now burnt customers that is incredibly difficult to bring back. So this idea of soft launching is really, really important. And I'll tell you now just a really easy framework that I go through in terms of how to soft launch a product or a service. So this is pretty typical, right? I mean, you have an idea for a business or an app, and people tend to start now by wireframing, right? Back in the day, it used to be that people would put together game design documents or technical design specifications. But now it tends to be that people just jump straight into the wireframing, which is great, right? It's a really nice visual way of approaching it. So you're into product development, right? Which is brilliant. And the goal in product development is obviously to get to that MVP as quickly as possible. You're scrambling. It's a mad scramble to get that service or that app to market. So Laundrapp, for example, took us about 3 months to actually get to market, which is fantastic, because you want to get people using the app to get that learning insight into the team as quickly as possible. So, you know, whether you call it pre-alpha, alpha, beta, it doesn't really matter too much. But the point is you're trying to get to MVP or soft launch as quickly as possible. And this is kind of where most people get this wrong, is that soft launch isn't just chuck it up on the App Store globally, you know, do a bit of marketing, let everyone kind of know about it, do some PR. That's not the idea of a soft launch. So I just want to drill into this soft launch in a little bit more detail, because I have this process. I call this checkpointing, right? And checkpointing is essentially you'll take those 10 KPIs or those 5 KPIs that I presented earlier, and what you want to do is you want to focus on one KPI at a time. And ideally, you're focusing on the first KPI at the top of the funnel first. So all you do in those early days is you're iterating as quickly as possible to try and hit that first key metric. Don't worry too much about monetization. Don't worry too much about the stuff that's further down the funnel. Just worry about this first KPI. So for example, if this is your sign up as part of your onboarding, just focus on the sign up and get that to a point where you're comfortable and it's hitting the number that you need to see within your commercial model for your business. And then once you've done that, move on to the next metric, then the next, then the next, then the next. And once you've ticked all of those boxes, you should in theory have a really, really well-polished app or service. Now this is exactly what we did with Laundrapp. Took us about 3 months to actually get through this point. So essentially what we then call, in this instance, the global launch, or the marketing launch, whatever you want to call it, the full launch. It took us about 3 months to get through this process. The reality is I've come from the games industry. Actually, I've worked on a number of games that have actually never, ever made it out because they actually never hit any of their key metrics. So they never actually got released. And this is really, really important because essentially, by the time you get to the marketing launch, that's when you want to be spending the bulk of your marketing budget, when you know that you've got a really, really well-refined product. And the key thing during this soft launch process is really you want to acquire a small but very, very representable sample and just enough people to be statistically accurate. So whether or not that's 100 downloads or 1,000 downloads, or whether it's 500 MAU, or whether it's 250 DAU, or whatever that metric is for you, the point is it's a small sample, but make sure it's statistically relevant. That's the key point here. So coming back to our dashboard, so essentially we're now starting to build this out, right? So we've soft launched our product, and we now have some retention metrics, right? Our D1, D7, D30 retention metrics are going in, and we've maybe just got our first couple of paying users, right? So now we have a conversion metric, which is fantastic. We're learning, and that's the key thing with MVP. Now it's time to overlay your cohorts, right? And a lot of people talk about cohort analysis, etc. And a lot of the analytics tools will allow you to track your cohort analysis. And cohorts, essentially, you take your key metrics and you carve them up over time. So now we introduce time into our dashboard. So we have week 1 metrics, week 2, week 3. And all you're doing at this point with your team is you're sitting down once a week and you're iterating on these metrics. You're trying to get these up and looking as good as possible. And now is the time for promotion. And this is promotion during soft launch, right? So these are some examples of things that we did with Laundrapp. I should add, not in soft launch, but these are just some ideas of promotional channels. We actually went onto TV very, very early. We actually went onto TV for the marketing launch of the service, which was back in January. January the 16th, we went straight onto TV. We've done outdoor advertising as well. We do a lot of direct mail, actually. So this is an example of a referral card. So if you imagine Uber, the kind of the double-sided digital referral program that they have, give £10, get £10. We do the same, but we actually do it physically. So when someone becomes a Laundrapp customer, we send them Laundrapp cards in the post to physically give to their friends. And those are just some examples. And obviously you have hundreds and hundreds of digital platforms as well. So that's your dashboard, and this is now how it starts to look, because you're starting to build this out. So now you're introducing your platforms. You've got platform A, B, and C, and you've spent some budget, you've got some cost per install data, and then you've got your product metrics, and now you've introduced your cost per acquisition, right? So at this point, you're starting to test some early marketing. I'm going to speed up slightly here. Now you're into build, measure, learn, and this is specifically when it comes to your advertising channels, okay? So let's take a very, very popular social network. And essentially, when you approach that social network and you're building a campaign, lots of people will build early stage like Facebook campaigns just to drive some early installs into their service or their app. You want to consider creative, messaging, targeting, and call to action. Those are kind of the targeting criteria, if you want. So for us with Laundrapp, we'll take 10 pieces of creative, 10 messages, 5 different targeting criteria, and 3 call to actions, right? So it's 10 by 10 by 5 by 3, that's 1,500 variations. Today, we might have anywhere in the region of 10,000 different permutations of ads that are live on Facebook. Because remember, only 10% of them will work. The other 90% will just lose you money. And what I can't tell you today is I can't tell you this call to action with this piece of creative target that this user is going to definitely work for your business. The point is you need to get as many variations out there as possible with a very, very small budget and then work it out for yourself, which comes back to the dashboard. So now we've introduced platform A, B, and C. We've got all of these different ad variations, and now we're starting to get a really good picture of what's working and what's not in the business. So these in green are showing some really, really positive early signs in terms of cost per acquisition. So 25, 22 pounds cost. I should add, sorry, that these are kind of made up, right? These aren't Laundrapp metrics. I should add, sorry. So cost per acquisition, 20, 27 pounds is pretty good. That's for a paying user, right? So that's looking good. And these are looking terrible, right? I mean, we've tested it. It's very, very low cost per install, but the cost per acquisition is actually quite high. So these are kind of flagged in red for us, right? We're unsure of these, but we're still testing. But really, return on investment is ultimately king. That's what you're looking for, right? Because if you can see positive return on investment for your marketing channels, you're in a point in your business where you can start to scale exponentially. So now we've got lifetime value introduced here. So because you've got actual financial data coming through from your customers, you can now actually start to overlay on the cohort your lifetime value, okay? Which ultimately will lead to your return on investment, because what you're looking for in here is your cost per acquisition or your CAC here versus the LTV, which gives you your return on investment. So actually what you've seen here now is actually the channels that you thought were looking good in terms of the cost per acquisition actually are now losing money based on LTV. So there's something not quite right with the quality of the user, but actually these ones that really looked expensive actually seem to be driving a really, really good quality of user. Now we see huge variations on different channels and different ways of advertising. I'm more than happy to share some insights with you afterwards. But yeah, it's really important, obviously, to introduce that LTV because, as I say, it's the way that you calculate the return on investment. Because this is really what you're looking for, right, in your business. You're looking for this consistent decline in cost per acquisition number. And as long as you're approaching marketing in this kind of lean and efficient way, and you're taking weekly product iterations, it will ultimately drive to this kind of diminishing cost per acquisition, which is really key for potential investors in the business and scaling up your advertising. So now you hit the global launch or the marketing launch and you're ready to scale. And this is when things get really, really exciting, right? Because you know you've got a really refined product. You've taken that really lean, iterative approach. You know what your metrics are. You know you're hitting them all. Your investors are probably getting very, very excited because your cost per acquisition is diminishing. And now you're ready to scale. So you take your dashboard. You know that these channels are working incredibly well for you. But the key thing to remember here is channels that work today may not work tomorrow. And the reason for this is because those channels that might be working will see diminishing returns really quickly. So on channels like Facebook, for example, you know, I've experienced campaigns that, you know, this week might be driving huge return on investment, 300-400% ROI. 2 weeks later, they're actually losing money. You need to switch them off, and then you need to recycle it again and again. And that's really how you build these things at scale. Because ultimately, this is what your investors are all looking for, right? So when you get to the point of raising finance for your business, this is what they're looking for, right? It's your CAC to LTV ratio. Because this CAC to LTV ratio is basically the profit margin in your advertising. And if your investors can see profit in your advertising, they know that you're in a position where you can scale very, very quickly. And essentially, this is how it would look. If you had a positive CAC to LTV ratio, this piece at the end here where the lines cross over, the piece in the middle is obviously your profit. And trust me when I say, you know, most investors these days are looking for this CAC to LTV ratio. And the key thing to remember here is 3 really is the magic number. So if you can show that your LTV is 3 times more than your cost per acquisition, you have a very, very healthy business. So for example, you know, Dropbox is around 3, to give you an example. I know some businesses that are closer to 20, but That's very, very rare, but 3 is that number that you're really looking for. So the other way of looking at this, very quickly, is if you understand that your lifetime value, let's say, is £100, then you really should be looking to spend £30 on your cost per acquisition. So that's the other way of looking at it. So to recap very quickly, start with your financial model, extrapolate out all of those key metrics. You want to build your marketing dashboard. You can keep it really simple. As I say, you know, we still do a lot of this in Excel, to be honest, but there are some great attribution tools out there that can actually do it automatically for you. I'm happy to share those afterwards. You want to integrate the analytics, attribution, and marketing SDKs from the very, very beginning. Always, always soft launch, and never, ever market or global launch until you've hit all of those key metrics. Use the checkpointing system that I've mentioned already. I've introduced that at 3 or 4 previous businesses, and it's worked incredibly well. Can't remember. Oh yeah, and ultimately focus on your CAC to return on investment ratio. Remember that kind of 3 number is really, really key. And as soon as you see any channels that are driving any kind of positive return on investment, remove budget from channels that are in decline and push it immediately into those positive ROI channels. And obviously start small, but scale as quickly as possible. So that's it. Hopefully it gives you something to think about. And you know, I obviously appreciate that some of you will probably be doing a lot of this already. Hopefully there's a few bits that you can take away from this. As I said before, I'm obviously here for the rest of the day. If you have any questions, I'm happy to assist. And obviously shameless self-promotion. But if you want to try Laundrapp, then you can use the code Amazon and you'll get £10 off. So thank you very much. Thank you.